Hi, I'm Katya Soldak. I'm the director of the documentary film The Lone Breakup, and I present to you my series From Socialism to Capitalism, where we tell stories about the wild 1990s when former socialist countries transitioned to free markets and the chaos and complications that followed. Today I'm speaking with Giorgi Isakadze about Georgia, a former Soviet republic, now an independent country in the Caucasus region, by the Black Sea. Giorgi served as a young political advisor to the Georgian government. He is now a recognized media personality on Georgian TV, and he is the editor of Forbes edition in Tbilisi.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Katya, for this opportunity. I am Giorgi Isakadze. Actually, I'm George, which is the most popular name worldwide, and it's Giorgi in Georgia, which is actually the most popular name in Georgia. So right today, I'm an editor-in-chief of Forbes in Georgia. At the same time, I'm also a board member and editor of BMG, it's Business Media Georgia. I'm doing business media in my country, in my homeland, which is called Georgia, country, not the US state.
Yes, we always have to make it clear. Even in one of the news segments, I think on mainstream television networks in America, once when they were covering the elections in Georgia, the state, they used the video footage of Georgia at Tbilisi, which was, of course, a big mistake. George, or Giorgi,
Yes, please.
Let's focus a little bit on the subject of our conversation, because we are talking about something that happened about 30 years ago, when former Soviet republics and countries of the former Soviet bloc in Central and Eastern Europe were transitioning from being planned, controlled economies and everything was controlled by the government to something that later developed into capitalism, or maybe in some countries it's still not capitalism.
I'm 45 years old. I will remember the period when the real socialist, or as Soviet officials wanted to present as communist period, was presented in that way. Early 80s is the period when I remember already my childhood. I cannot remember the period when Leonid Brezhnev died, but I definitely remember the next two general secretaries who died quite frequently. It was Konstantin Chernenko, if I remember correctly, and Yuri Andropov, former head of KGB, one of the chief of ideology of the Soviet Union. And after that, what I clearly remember is the period of Mikhail Gorbachev, beginning the reforms, perestroika, democracy in Soviet Union. Another reason why I remember this period was that alongside, in the leadership of Soviet Union by the time, together with Gorbachev, was Georgian. His name was Eduard Shevardnadze, who was Minister of Foreign Affairs, and later on he became President of Georgia. You were absolutely right in regards of early 90s and about Georgia as well, because Georgia, yes, was alongside with Baltic countries, one of the leaders who was granted independence, and we paid a lot for that. We paid our lives, we paid our economy, we paid our territory.
The first years of Georgia's independence were marked by the civil war that resulted in a decade of political instability, permanent financial, economic, and social crisis.
When internal first phase of the civil war began, it was again on our main avenue, the capital of Tbilisi, when everything, the real war was happening like in 1 kilometer from my apartment, from House of Flat. It was crazy period when Russia was supporting sites by feeding them with armory and things like that, just to provoke the process of internal war and civil war as much as possible.
What was it like when there was the war and people still lived in a city? Can you describe that?
Maybe that was the craziest period in my life, because I remember everything precisely. And by that period, I don't know anything about economy, finances, or monetary system and things like that. I have uh, portal camera with myself, and I was picturing everything, this, how, and what was happening on our main avenue when people were just killing each other. And just from 200 meters from there, the city was continuing living in a way that nothing was happening there. I remember this period as the most tragic one, because at the same time it was solidarity, and at the same time it was something which was absolutely ridiculous. I remember it. So this period was close to Christmas and New Year, and I remember how both sides celebrated this Christmas and New Year, and they were competing to each other, who will shoot from tank, from other haubits or things like that. It was terrible period. I remember old Soviet architecture buildings which were in fire, and I remember I was in my yard by that period together with my neighbors, and I remember the black rain. And it was not actually the rain. It was partly coming, everything what was fasting from the fire, what has happened on the Central Avenue. And the wind was blowing these parts to our side, and it was like a black rain. And everybody remembers this date, 9th of April, peaceful meeting and protester demonstration in the midnight. Actually, it was midnight. It was 4 a.m. in the morning. It was pressed by Red Army Special Forces. We had about 21 deaths by that period. Thousands were injured and poisoned. And what I remember during that period, it was first blood, as we call it during the Soviet period. And it was the first price what we paid, independence. I was 14 years old. I remember that night when I went back, because my parents were insisting me to be with them. And we still live in the same apartment that we used to have in 1989. I personally live there, and it is just 500 meters, max 1 kilometer away from the Central Avenue, where all these things has happened. It was the first signal to the civilized world that something is happening in the Soviet Union besides perestroika, besides the reform which was announced by Gorbachev team. It was battle and it was war for independence. And it was followed by the first independent elections, which was held in Soviet Georgia, and first time we elected independent government and party. Communist Party went to a minority in the Georgian parliament, and new government declared Georgian independence. This is the period when we begin taking the first steps of independence, and this is the beginning of the new page, the history of Georgia, and also Georgian economy, because before that, Georgian economy was part of the Soviet economy, and it was a part of the myth and legend that Georgia was the wealthiest country due to statistics and the level of locals' richness or whatever, but it's all statistics. And it's
so
all,
in the Soviet Union time, Georgia was considered to be the wealthiest or one of the wealthiest countries?
Absolutely, because everybody, it was the best place for the Soviet republics to have fun, to have and drink Georgian wine, to have rest in our I don't know, mountain, sea, or other resorts. So yes, and at the same time, Georgian Soviet leaders were, how to say it, smart enough, let me say so, to present our economic results in a way they should. Of course, it was a part of Soviet corruption system. The local misunderstandings and conflicts within the Georgia was happening by the end of 80s as well, but it was not transformed to a classic war actions. But in the beginning of 90s, it was transformed to the civil war and to the war with Abkhazia. In Abkhazia, then it was South, before it was South Ossetia, and later on, and Russia supported these separatist regimes, and it was like a part of also some so-called Soviet ideology. Georgia remained very much poor and dependent on Russia, and we had no choice by that period but to agree to become a member of the new established Union of Independent Countries, CIS countries, so-called SNG. Soviet Union collapsed. It was diversified. It was we had 15 independent countries, but nothing has happened in a way it should be. That who was covering debts, how monetary or fiscal system or economic system should be deactivated within the 15 countries. I'm not talking about Georgia. Georgia is absolutely outstanding and very tragedy economic case, and I will tell later on why, but nobody saw it because emotions were like more about the independence, and nobody had like straight mind to fix everything in a way it should be. So after collapse of the Soviet Union, we are like in a process here of the civil war. Georgia is becoming even more poorer, but I want to admit that Georgia was a leader among Soviet republics, was number one who lost its economy. It was equal to 72% of our GDP. For viewers and followers of Forbes, I want to detailize what does it mean for a country when it will lose 3/4 of its economy and GDP. It means that we lost even more assets and wealth of our economy than German Federation lost during the World War II in 1941, 1945. It was period when was no light, no heat, when everything was problematic, including municipal transportation and everything. And during this period, I'm a student. I'm the second generation of the foreign economic relations of the Tbilisi State University. The only advantage what I have is my English, because I never had a chance to study abroad. My family was not rich enough to send me for study abroad. And since age of 6, me, myself, my junior brother, as well as a lot of representatives of my generations, we had private teachers for English. I remember my first teacher in English was Mr. Nick Volkov. And my final teacher in English was Mr. Vladimir Sadovsky, who was our neighbor, and it was very comfortable for us to learn basic English, grammar, everything from him, because he was like 3 minutes from our apartment. But at the same time, it was tragedy for me because he was not talking neither with me nor with my brother in Russian or in Georgian. Oh, wow. The only way we should do it was in English. And I remember at least half of our home lessons in his apartment, because we were visiting him, was on the candlelight. We never had light during that period. And I remember the period when he was preparing tea for us, and it was done on the specific oil sink called, while we didn't have electricity, he
Let
was
me just
boiling.
pause here for a second. You live in the center of the city, in
Yeah,
a nice apartment building. Because of the
absolutely.
economic
The
collapse,
most
there is no
prestigious,
heat, there is no light.
absolutely. There is no heat, there is no light, and the only way, it was like 4 or 5 hours a day light, and nobody knows when it's going to become back. There are big long side rows for bread, and we were helping bread cars to deliver these breads to our regional district shops. 100 or 200 people, and they were gathering twice a day when the bread was delivered to our bread shop. By that period, if you remember, Katya,
Separate bread
so the
shop.
time bread shop, remember bread shop? We
Yeah.
were making alongside this line, our own line. We were taking all these tanks like this, putting there like 30 or 40 breads, putting it to the shop, and nobody was doing. While the bread car was empty, we were going out from this line, and line was following by the representatives of our districts and others who were in this line. Sometimes the line was so huge that I remember 3 or 4 times we used to have a special paper pointing who was 43 or 98.
Oh my
And
God.
this period was happening, but it was small district. Yes, it's a prestigious, it's in the middle of the city. It's one of the most prestigious district of Tbilisi, where, I don't know, the square meters, the current price of the square meter is 2,000 US dollars. And yes, this is happening here. And we were in the same situation at other districts in Tbilisi and other cities or towns of Georgia. What I remember, just near my street, some private shops were opening. And one of our neighbors offered my mom, said, Tamara, you could buy some chicken or pork, fry them, and we can sell them in our shop. I remember that during 4 or 5 months, every early morning, like 6 a.m., my father and my mother, they were visiting this agro market, so-called agricultural bazaar market. They were buying, I don't know, 9, 10 chicken, fresh one, pig. What I remember, it was this fantastic smell with while they were in a process of preparation, frying and things like that, with all some Georgian specifics and things like that. And then we were delivering. That was already my job, together with my mom, to go to the shop and to put it in the vitrine and to sell it. Of
How
course,
old were you?
What I remember this period, Katya, it's like it was happening from 15, 16, 17, 14 years old. And
Your
it's
family
again
was
in the night.
turning into entrepreneurs and
Yeah,
cooking
yeah.
chicken to sell.
Yeah, because my father was a landscape architect, and during the wartime, there is nothing to do with the greenery outside Tbilisi. My father was a landscape architect of Tbilisi. He was responsible for greens, and there was no job for him. And that's the job what he was covering, or making some specific private projects for his friends or some private orders. My mom, she was a doctor, urological direction, and at the same time, while working in the hospital, she was doing this job, because yes, we could do something, myself, my brother and father, but by the end of the day, the final cooking and preparation of the chicken and pigs was up to mom, and then we were delivering it to the market. So that's our story, and that's what's happening.
And yet with the candlelight, you were sitting there learning English.
Yes, and as I mentioned, that was the only advantage of myself as a student who was a part of the absolutely new specialization of the Tbilisi State University economic faculty called foreign economic relations. My dream was to become a journalist. I will have a confession now, and I'm so happy that this confession is happening with Katja Soldak that, yes, while I was in the 8th or 9th class of Georgian school, I had a dream to become a journalist. A friend of my father, with whom I was traveling or riding by his car, Volga, by that period, asked me, listen, you are a big man already. What's your plans for the future? I said, Uncle David, I want to become a journalist. He's like driving this Volga Gaz 24, and he's like looking at me like that. Listen, are you crazy? It's like middle of the Soviet Union, and just on the wheel of the car, you will never come out from this circle. Think about the economy. The world is changing, and you will have a chance to have absolutely new knowledge and absolutely new practice. So think about the economy. The second, what I've done, for the next day, I asked my father to find the special school where I could learn maths in a more specific way. I tried, but I could not find the space for that, and I remained in my school near Philharmonic, 51st. So as a second generation of the faculty of economics, our specialization and mine is I'm a foreign economics specialist, and that class was one of the most famous because it was like first or the second course we really attended. All the rest we were working, we were earning money because our families really needed support. Some of our classmates, they just left the country, went to Ireland, US, Germany, Great Britain. As I told you, I never had the same chance. And by the end of the day, somebody should pick up here in Georgia their Soviet diplomas, because all of my friends left. And that's why I remained in Tbilisi to pick up at least their diplomas, because they left.
So you were documenting things back then, even though you went to study economics, which was probably a great idea.
I did.
It gave you the understanding, and it's perfect for business media. But you completed the circle with your journalistic interest. It's amazing.
Because by that period, I was already a part of the administration. I was quite young. I was 19 years old when by the state minister of Georgia, which means by that period, actually, it was prime minister of Georgia. He was making his new team of young generation, and I was hired as an advisor.
So you buried the lead. At 19, you were part of the government organization in New Jersey.
Because publicity was following me still, Katja. Anyway, by that period, I was 16, just a minute, when I became... This is my first newspaper. Banks and Finances.
In Georgian?
In Georgia. It
no,
is,
in Georgian language.
Yes, in Georgian language. It is 1994.
Oh my God.
I'm 19 years old. Here I am with the small Lennon glasses, with a big Lennon glasses, black one. Banks and Finances, the first economic newspaper in Georgia. And it costed by that period already, our coupon was depreciated, 250,000 coupons. Can you imagine it?
Wow. That's a lot of zeros.
This is the first newspaper, economic newspaper in Georgia. It still exists. I'm not a part of this team anymore, but I did a good job because Banks and Finances are still with us here in Georgia. So here is the first Georgian economic newspaper.
Wow. So I'm surprised that even that early, the newspaper was in Georgian language.
Yes, and it was very much popular because it was, as I told you, it is the coming year when the first steps, the real economic steps were taken in a wise way. When hyperinflation is on the top, and at the same time, new members of the government and new team, they are already thinking about some reforms, real reforms, real fiscal reform, real custom and tax reform, about real monetary reform. So everything this is happening. IMF is coming back to Georgia, making first step together with the World Bank, and we are becoming a part like a team. At the same time, during this period, I also have a tapes of that. We are establishing the first TV program called Business Sakme in Georgia, and it was the only existing business on the only existing TV channel in Georgia. Actually, by that period, we used to have just one channel, and now we have 67 Georgian channels already here. And that's how it has happened that my publicity was like that. I was a part of, in a way, of education. I was learning economics, but at the same time, what was the dream of my childhood? To become a journalist in a practical way. I was doing that. I became an editor-in-chief of the newspaper, and I was a narrator of the TV weekly program called Sakme. So I was public enough to be invited by the state minister to the office, and later on, in 3 or 4 years, I became a head of anti-monopoly service of Georgia, and later on, I had the privilege to serve as an assistant to the President Shevardnadze when I was 25 years old.
Wow, that's so young.
Yeah, that was young period. And
all of that is very young, 19,
yeah,
21.
as a governmental servant, I finalized my job when I was 27 as a deputy state minister, called something like vice prime minister, covering IMF, World Bank, and IFIs, other IFIs. So after that, I'm in business. That was another gap of my relations with media, but later on, I was making my first steps, establishing newsroom for the local TV station here about business and economics, and finally, I had a offer from you guys to become an editor-in-chief. That's how comeback of Giorgi Isakadze to media has happened in 1996. Sorry, in 2016, after 20 years.
It's amazing. So it also sounds like it was the time of opportunities for a lot of young and talented people.
Nobody had a feeling, how should we deal with the independent Georgian economy? And by the end of the day, after declaring this independence, during 3 or 4 years, we did not have mental understandings of paying taxes, paying for light, for heat, for water. This was something, it was at the same time disaster and happiness of our independence and tragedy of the independence. But we should change mentally little by little. Unfortunately,
so did people just grab whatever was available to them?
Yes, it did happen. And when I'm talking about, say, 78% of losing our assets, Katya, of course, I mean not only collapse of Soviet Union. It was also a part of corrupt and still bribery system. What was happening here, as I told you, almost 100% of Georgian economy went to shadow. And 1995 is the first year when the economy begins to indicate just first statistics and first, let me say so, positive trends. Before that, it was devaluation of the local currency, which was substituted by the Russian. It was called coupon because at the same time, coupon had a chance, like Georgian lari does during this period, to have a success. But at the same time, monetary reform was not done in a way it should be. And at the same time, during 3 years, we faced corrupted deals through the National Bank of Georgia, while it was granting special loans to specific loyal business structures for them to make import of oil, of, anything what was needed by that period. We so much loved each other in that period. As mentioned, if we will exclude the war, if not war, I'm dreaming about that years. because it was absolutely different approach. It was absolutely different spirit. It was, I don't know, it was cases every day, every minute, how neighbors and citizens were supporting each other during this absolutely crazy period when we didn't know anything. Yesterday we had money, Russian money. Early morning we are waking up and somebody is telling us from the TV that you have nothing, but we just don't have nothing. We have really nothing. We cannot buy, we cannot sell, because even if we want to sell and even if we had something to sell, nobody knew for what to sell. Dollars, pounds, and things like that, they're prohibited still. So crazy period. But Georgia damaged itself due to the civil war, what was happening, and internal political battle, what has happened here, which caused then later on, because of the war with Russia, thousands of deaths, and at the same time, the beginning of recovering of Georgian economy. It was not just minus 70%, Katya, of our GDP. It was plus 300,000 refugees coming from Abkhazia and South Ossetia.
Georgia is known for the Rose Revolution in 2003 and the presidency of Mikhail Saakashvili, which brought progress into the country's development.
And I think we had a years, let me say so, when we really lost equilibrium of our mentality, because we really made the reforms what Georgians never used to do so. Georgians abolished traffic police. Georgian abolished Ministry of Internal Affairs in a way it should be. 92% of all the permits and licenses were just abolished because there was no other way to battle with corruption. It was not only just the way of, it was a mental problem. So just together to battle against the personalities and system, it was impossible. So real steps were taken by that period. And I call this period when equilibrium of Georgian mentality was changed for some years. What in reality is becoming our country a leader in economic freedom more than United States and or other European countries and things like that. Our economy was growing for 10% during 5 years, while this tragedy has happened with us, another war with Russia in 2008, which was absolutely not in the same way shock what we used to have.
In 2008, Russia attacked Georgia and annexed 2 of its territories, the separatist-leaning areas of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. Since then, Georgia has separated itself from Russia to the point it doesn't have diplomatic ties.
Why the same shock has not happened with Georgia as the same one as in the early 90s? Because in the couple months, with the great help of our Western partners, $4 billion were granted to Georgia due to some programs. Mm-hmm. That's how Georgia supported. But we additionally lost territory. So we were like, continuing paying price for our independence and at the same time mistakes. But reforms were making Georgia the most affordable country of making business worldwide #1 by World Bank, and we became really #1. For today, just to resume our talk, I missed some reforms. And due to the minuses from what we began, maybe that's why I'm always in a hurry. But at the same time, I do understand some mental logic and some problems with history, population, its connections with Soviet ties and Soviet mentality. I do understand that, but Georgia has shown during few years what kind of reformatic and #1 regional country it can be due to the democracy level and things like that. The December of 2019, while this damn COVID came to our reality. So now everything has changed, including our reality. It's not the best period for Georgia by the end of the August of 2021, but I think I think Georgians will make some good steps forward, and the Georgians will be proud of themselves in the nearest future again.
Thanks for listening to our conversation with Giorgi Isakadze about post-Soviet Georgia and its transition to a new order. I'm Katya Soldak with my series From Socialism to Capitalism about life in Europe's former socialist countries in the wild 1990s.